Knights. I generally did not know anything about this small little series, besides like the very little stuff I can gather from the titles/appearances in the Sega crossover games, which is usually not a lot. In Sonic and All-Stars Racing, Knights is literally just holding the flag at the start of the race thing in that game. That's so lame. But otherwise, yeah, what is this series about? Turns out it would have been pretty hard for me to find out what this game was about, since this series only got 2 games, one on the Sega Saturn and one on the Wii. The Wii game sold okay, but in 2017-ish, it would have been pretty tricky to find a copy. So I kind of just wanted to see what this little Knights series was, and why it might have been basically abandoned. Knights into Dreams came out after Sonic Oh, it's probably Sonic's fault this series is dead then. Damn. Didn't know Sonic was a murderer. Anyway, it came around because Yuji Naka and Naoto Oshima, the guys who made the main gameplay concept and designed Sonic himself, wanted to take a break and develop a new idea. So, instead of developing a new Sonic game for the upcoming system, the Sega Saturn, they handed that responsibility over to Sega STI, who was poised to make Sonic Extreme. That was a great idea. Knights ended up being a game I'm not entirely sure how to classify, because I've never really played a game like this before. I guess arcade would be the most accurate, but even then it doesn't fully describe what it's like. But first, story. Let me check the manual, because the game does an early video game and barely explains its story in-game. So this Wiseman guy is getting dream energy from people to try and enter the real world, so Knights gets these 2 kids who had a bad day. Boy failed at basketball and girl got stage fright, but I could only see the girl's cutscene to see why she's sad the guy's one did not appear. Anyway, Knights abducts them to save the Night Realm. Basically, each stage has you flying around to collect blue orbs, which you use to destroy these Metroid-looking things. After getting the dream energy that the Metroid-looking things have, you return to the start of a stage and then repeat the process 4 more times with different flight paths, and then fight a boss. To collect these orbs, you use Knights to fly it around on a 2D, 3D plane. Basically, due to them thinking that full 3D movement while flying would have been too hard, they made it so that the player only has control as if they're on a 2D axis. The path Knights takes can loop around and isn't limited to the 2D axis, but your control of them is. So, for a comparison, it's kind of like Sonic Generations with classic Sonic, how the camera and path can loop in a 3D way, but you're still controlling it as if it was a 2D platformer, no matter what the camera or stage layout may look like. And it works pretty well for the most part. Flying through the air is pretty fun since the controls are just in 2D and actually really easy to control what direction you want to go in for the most part, which works really well. Superman 64 disagreed. Though I do find my fingers did get a bit sore from flying around all the time. This might be because I'm using this third-party Sega Saturn controller, but my fingers did get a little bit sore from having to move it around the D-pad all the time. But looking at the first-party Saturn controller, it looks like it would be a lot more comfortable since it's more disc-shaped. They also had support for the Sega Saturn 3D controller, which allowed for analog movement instead of 8-directional, which I couldn't be bothered figuring out how to get this set up, and while it probably would have made the game easier and improve it, it still works well enough with the basic 8-way movement. The arcade elements of this game come in with the score and ranking system, which... Wait, that's a Sonic thing. Wow, I can't believe Sonic stole from Sonic Team, how could he? But during your quest to collect the blue orbs, there are a bunch of different things to interact with inside the level. You have stars to collect, groups to go through, and enemies to defeat, all racking up your score to try and get as high of a score and rank as possible. This is the main replay value of the game and the main point, which isn't just getting to the end. Because, unless you suck at video games like me, this game is less than 2 hours during a time where games were starting to become a bit longer than only 2 hours. But getting the higher ranks, I gotta see it best for individual dream energy, so I don't know what the strat is meant to be. But for the right people, I can imagine this would be a really fun little system. Just not for me though. I'm not the biggest arcade/high school person unless it's specific rhythm games. This is the point where I put up my MyMo photos to brag about my high scores. But even in a more objective focused way, the main gameplay loop is still alright. There is some form of stress in trying to locate enough orbs to get the dream energies due to the 2-minute timer, and it's not really boring to try hunt them down. You can still beat it if you don't beat it in the time, since you can control the kids in a 3D platformer reminiscent way, but lose basically all score, and it just kind of feels bad and not like you're really beating the level. You can also completely fail in this state, so you don't really want it. Despite the second chance once the timer's up, I still think the timer helps play a role in making the game more fun if you're trying to play it in a more objective focused way. Though one thing I did find a bit annoying is how close the camera is to Knights. This is probably because I'm playing this game at 4 times the original size on a modern display, so I'm not sure how it is on an actual Saturn on a CRT. I mean, on a CRT, my Sega Saturn is real, I assure you. But the camera is a bit close to Knights. You kind of have to do a sound wave-like motion to see the entire area to find enough orbs without requiring you to do laps, which for me is a little annoying, but I think it's meant to encourage exploration, maybe. I'm not entirely sure, but for me personally, it is a bit annoying. On the visuals though, wow, this game looks really good for coming out in 1996, and it's all due to the art direction and clever usage of 2D sprites. The game is so bright and vibrant while still looking unlike Bubsy 3D, my favorite PS1 platformer. It just pops a lot and is very pleasant to look at without getting overwhelming. The 2D sprites also, okay, the enemies are kind of iffy looking, but the rest of the 2D elements still look alright, and don't really take away from the look of the game. Also, I don't have anywhere else to put this, but I like the little spin animation that occurs when you can orb back to the start of the level thing. I just think it's neat. The bosses though, they're kinda meh. They aren't bad, but they all boil down to doing the same thing like 10 times, and I never found them to be the most fun or engaging. One thing about them though is if you're unable to defeat them within the time limit, you are given a hint on how to defeat them if you couldn't figure it out, which I think is alright. Makes them a bit of a puzzle the first time, without leaving you confused on what to do on subsequent attempts. Though this magician boss guy, even with it, wasn't very clear, and I kind of got stuck on him. Then when I tried doing the bloke's path, my game bugged out and sent him flying until the end of time. So I don't think the game wants me beating it, so I might not have. Overall, I think Knights is a pretty solid game that is really unique, and I think is really cool. While I'm not really the target audience, since there's a pretty big emphasis on high score achieving, I still did enjoy my time with it, and if you want to discover the Sega Saturn, I would highly recommend it. If only Sega made it accessible for modern day audiences, that would have been nice. It was on Steam, but that was taken off the marketplace for some reason. Physical PC release was basically just a code in the box as well, so it's really difficult to play it legally in the current day, unfortunately. But this game, relative to the console it was on, did really well, selling 500,000 units and being the 10th best-selling game for the console. Yeah, that's not a lot, especially nowadays for big studio releases, but the best-selling game on the console was only 2 million, so it did pretty good. Sega did make attempts to re-release this game over the years, with it getting a PS2 port in 2008 only in Japan, then a re-release on the PS3 and Xbox 360, but before all of that, got a sequel released on the Wii in 2007. Why did the re-release go to the PS2 then? What? Wait, this isn't a Wii game, what? Sega actually made a mini packing game based on Knights called Christmas Nights into Dreams, or, well, it was kind of free? Basically, it was part of some Christmas Sega Saturn bundles and was also given away a lot either to people who already owned the Saturn, or for people who bought different Sega games, or a copy of a magazine in an attempt to boost the Saturn sales. Considering the Dreamcast came out like 2 years later, I don't think it was a very successful campaign. Christmas Nights is basically just a Nights into Dreams demos that has some holiday skins depending on what time of year you play it. It contains the girl's first level of the game as the only level, which, considering the size of the main game, is fair enough as a demo freebie. After beating the stage, you get to play a simple match game to unlock presents, which has some neat stuff like a gallery. This kind of stuff would be neat for people who were already Knights fans, and since the game seemed pretty readily available and usually free, it'd be a cool thing to go through. Assuming you wanted to grind the first level over and over again. Yeah, the gallery requires a grind, which I don't want to do that to unlock all the content, sorry. But overall, for a demo/collector's thingy, it serves its purpose alright. The opening cutscene in the English version has a glacial pacing though. What on earth is that about?
And people are looking for presents for their loved ones. Among them,
Knight's Journey of Dreams is kind of a retelling with the first game, since the plot, well, it isn't the same, but it's very similar. Basically, Helen and Will get transported to the dream world after a dream that should have disqualified this from a G-Age rating. I would have been scared the hell out of this as a little baby. And, they kind of just mess around for a while, and just so happen to collect the Idios, which is the dream energy thing, to put a stop to Wiseman, because he's doing basically the same thing he did last time. He's also alive, still apparently, but that kind of doesn't end up being much of a goal, since you kind of just mess around for most of the game, it feels like, from a story perspective. Okay, yeah, the story isn't great, it's kind of which is a slight issue with how incredibly cutscene heavy this game is. Like, half the game is cutscenes, which, yet this game is only like 6 hours, and the story isn't that good for the cutscenes to take up half of the game.
What?
And even then, the rules of this world start getting a bit confusing when you think about it. So you have this dream world that people go to when they're asleep, and this Wiseman guy, like the first game, wants to take over Nightopia or something. But it's established that the dream worlds are like different per person. The people who inhabit the dream worlds are different versions of like the same people. By people, I mean Nightopians and Knights Real, all those guys, not the humans, because Will and Helen's dreams are taking place at the same time, so there must be 2 different Knights. It would not make much sense for there not to be 2 different Knights, so for Knights and Reala to be at multiple locations at once, it just wouldn't work unless there's some form of consistency between the dream worlds, like the parallel universes. So if Knights is trapped in one dream world, they're trapped in all dream worlds or something like that. Even though it's kind of silly, and I guess Wiseman just can take over parallel universes. You could probably tell from my incoherent, confused ramblings that I generally don't understand how this game's world works. The presentation of the game, though, I like overall, but there are a few iffy elements. The environments just look gorgeous. The dream worlds, for the most part, look amazing, and Sonic Team just really knows how to get the most out of lower-end hardware, because, wow, these just look really nice. I especially like Helen's locations. They all look like places I'd want to go. And I hate the beach, so me wanting to go to one is pretty impressive. The cutscene presentation is a little odd. Most of the time, it's fine. But during the points in the cutscenes when Knights and one of the kids are... They call it dualized, where they basically share control over Knights' body. They do this little ghostly projection thing to show through mouth movements who's talking and, in air quotes, in control. I like how this is done, since it'd be useful for deaf people, but it kind of leads to conversations that look really awkward presentation-wise. This is especially true when Knight seems to be the main one who's actually posing. So the kids don't really feel like they express much of their personality while in these cutscenes. And on the kids, they look kind of out of place next to Knights. The kids are done in this game's overall more realistic art direction. Well, it's still fantastical since dreams. But unlike the kids in the previous game, who had more anime-esque designs, Helen and Will are designed to be more like proper British children, not anime characters. This choice kind of causes Knights and the human child to kind of clash with the human designs, and when pre-rendered, Knights looks a bit off-putting, honestly. The big eyes on Knights and the Nightopians as well, and their proportions just look odd next to the kids' smaller eyes and more realistic proportions. They just don't mesh, in my opinion. The gameplay this time is the same, but since I have the nunchuck, I have more directional movement, compared to the 8 that I was stuck with in the previous game, which, yeah, it works well. Mostly. I do find with the nunchuck setup that holding a direction can be a little tricky, since the controller has the 8 directional grooves, which makes angles that aren't in the cardinal directions a bit trickier. But it wasn't too bad. If you don't have a nunchuck or classic controller, however, you can point the Wii Remote to your screen and point in the direction you want knights to go for analog movement. Yeah! Okay, from what I did play with using the pointer controls, it actually didn't seem like it'd be that bad of a control option. It worked surprisingly well. I still used a nunchuck because I didn't want to point at the screen the whole game, so it might not work as well for the rest of the game outside of the tutorial, but it worked okay there. The main gameplay loop takes on a fairly different structure compared to the first game. You have the different areas, but in each area you have 5 missions to complete in a linear order, and overall, they're good. My favorite one might be the Octopole one, where you basically just have to get as big of a combo, called link chains, as possible. To rack up your combo, you just have to do things that grant you points in relatively quick succession. They require a level of precision and speed that wasn't required in the previous game, and it's pretty fun. In each area, you also have the chase stages, which are the most similar to the main gameplay loop of the first game. You're put inside an area and need to chase these birds down who have keys to unlock the cages. I like the original method way more. Personally, I don't really understand how you're meant to catch up to the birds. The game never explains to you how you're meant to gain speed or catch up to them, and for me, it kinda just happens eventually. I also might have missed a textbook on how to catch up to them quickly. If I did, that's my bad. Genuinely though, sometimes it feels like flying at normal speeds is enough to catch up with the bird and defeat it, and sometimes I could be doing the rapid spin thing in a straight line and would never be able to catch up, so I don't know how you're meant to catch up with them. But eventually I do, and after catching 3 birds and unlocking the cages, you fight a boss, which, yeah, they aren't really much better compared to the first game. One improvement to the bosses is the fact you're told how you're meant to defeat them straight away, usually, so that's nice. But I also found a few of the bosses to be annoying and not that fun. You also have to fight every boss twice, once at the end of each chase level, and a harder version in the end of each world. Out of all the bosses, I think like 5 out of the 8 were alright. However, you still had the one where you had to tilt the board to get these cat things to fall through holes. I personally just didn't find the physics to really work the greatest, and it just being really annoying to actually try and sink them in the hole just led to it not being that fun, especially on the hard mode where you had these little mounds. The Cerberus fight also wasn't great, and it just did not make sense to me, and the rematch being bad and having no clue how to make it consistent, and the damn magician again just not being enough fun. This fight did get a pretty substantial change. Still not that fun because you kind of just need to do loops in the area to try and find where he is behind this void thing, and yeah, I did not really enjoy it. One of the other missions is always a random minigame, and they vary a decent amount. Some are alright, such as the jewel collecting one. I thought that one was alright and engaging enough. Some are a bit boring, such as the one where you circled the human chow, which I found to be way too easy and a lot less fun. And then there's the one that sucks! It's a weird one where you have to keep up with the scrolling bar thingy and fly into the music notes in time with the song, and this is so unnecessarily difficult. You are only allowed to miss 4 notes. Miss 5 and the night over. Start from the beginning, buddy. Which ends up being really strict. There's also the fact you're both faster and slower than the area you have to keep up with. When flying straight ahead, you're faster. But when you have to fly diagonally to hit the notes, you end up being slower. So it's a combination of speeding up or slowing down to be at the bar, and also ensuring you hit the notes, which I found way more cumbersome and annoying than fun. Finally, in Helen's story, instead of having 2 minigames, you have one platformer-esque level. Will does have one too, but it's got a lot more common with a minigame in his campaign. These are fine, though the controls are definitely not very suited for a platformer-like gameplay, and a lot of that is due to the camera. You have no camera control at all, which makes seeing where you're going or what's in front of you a little annoying sometimes. Now, I understand that the Wii Remote doesn't really have an option for camera control, but with the nunchuck and classic controller, there was no excuse. This made traversing levels a lot more cumbersome than necessary, which is especially true in Mirror Labyrinth level, which I'd argue is a bit more disorientating with the current camera system. Then, I found out in Wheels level that you can press Z to center the camera behind you, which Would have been nice if I hadn't played this after Helen's story, which, on Wheel's story, it kind of feels like he has the most focus out of the two. He has an exclusive Riala boss fight, which, outside of a true ending, which requires you to get all C ranks on every level, you only fight them once in Will's story, which is weird. Also include the fact that Will's story feels way more fleshed out in comparison to Helen's. Easier to understand, and the fact he has the most unique minigames since Helen just has the platforming. It feels like he's the focus and Helen's the side story. I just think that's weird. But Helen's story does have one benefit technically over Will's, the music. The soundtrack to this game is actually pretty decent, but I found Helen's boss fight music in one of the platforming levels to really stick out to me and sound really good, even though the spider boss ones doesn't really sound like it fits with the game, but oh well. Overall, Knight's Journey of Dreams is still a solid game. While I think it's a lot more flawed than the Saturn game, I still think it was a good time for the most part, and it tried some new things. But despite selling okay-ish, I think, I'm not Sega, with 500,000 copies, they never made a new Knights games. But why? Probably due to a combination of quite a lot of factors. First, Knights did fine, I think, sold a little less than the Saturn game. However, the Sonic games from around the time that were at least co-developed by Sonic Team all outsold this game by a large margin, which would have made Sega less likely to create a new one. That and corporate restructuring. About a year after the game had released, Sonic Team had been made part of Sega's CS Research and Development No. 2. After this restructuring, Sonic Team basically only made Sonic and some Puyo Puyo games. Before restructuring, they were making all kinds of nonsense, like whatever the Rub Rabbits was. Generally never heard of this game, but apparently it was developed by Sonic Team. I also think that Knights kinda doesn't work that well in the modern day with how most widely played games are consumed. Knights, even the Wii game that felt much more objective based, still felt quite like a high score / arcade-like game in its design, which hasn't really been popular in anything outside of rhythm games for the past 15 years. Even then, most rhythm games are still quite niche, but perhaps with the success of Star Fox 2026, with how it also sort of still has its arcadey roots, maybe we can see another Knights games in the future, preferably an original title. Sonic Team hasn't forgotten about Knights at all, as they're in Sonic Racing Crossworlds. Maybe there is a chance for a comeback even if it's more of a budget title. Even though I think overall Knights as a series is only alright, I'd love to see Sonic Team make one little entry for their baby. Hopefully it's not for an actual baby, because then it would probably suck.